You're wrong about game localization. Now that I've offended everyone, why should anyone even listen to what I have to say here? I'm not going to make you listen to my entire life story, but we do need to hit some key points. My native language is English, specifically American English. I've lived in Japan for several years now, and I speak Japanese fluently enough to live normally. I did Japanese to English translation for a time on the JET program, and while I don't have nearly as much translation experience as a lot of professional game localizers do, I've experienced many of the same struggles to some degree. I will be focusing on Japanese and English, but many points will likely apply to other languages. There, that wasn't so bad. So here's my hot take. You're wrong about game localization, so is everyone else, including me, and that's okay. When I was studying Japanese in school, we would get these assignments and tests that required us to produce the most accurate translations possible, always with the aim of demonstrating understanding of the grammar points, how things fit together. There was no room for taking creative liberties, even if it would have remained entirely accurate. Creative writing was not the point. Along my journey to learn Japanese, I would try to consume media in Japanese here and there. Manga, anime, movies, music, and of course games. I might set the audio to Japanese and the text to English, and it would always be so interesting to see what the translators did. It was very rarely the kind of translation I had to do in school. I had some strong opinions at times, and that included a preference for keeping Japanese honorifics in the English, despite the fact that English doesn't have san, chan, kun, and all that jazz. I was reading them, so I don't know if I would have appreciated the honorifics as much if I'd had to listen to them spoken aloud, but I loved getting that extra layer of immersion into a culture so unlike the one I grew up in. It was that sweet cherry on top. It was fun being able to say, that's not exactly what the Japanese means. I was getting better at Japanese, and seeing that progress take shape was a thrill. It wasn't necessarily a criticism every time, but every now and then I did think that I had a much better translation. And no one was going to convince me otherwise. In reality, I just preferred something different. It's now time for a mini Japanese lesson. One thing I love about Japanese is how you tell someone that something is wrong. You don't actually use the word wrong. You just say it's different. Shigaimasu. It feels so much friendlier to me. I love it. Japanese and English are very different languages, and they come from very different cultures. There is often no clear equivalent in the other language, and that means you have to get creative to communicate the same concepts and feelings. When you have to communicate a feeling, sometimes the literal translation does more harm than good. Once I started translating things myself, I had to ask some fundamental questions. The kinds of questions you don't ask until the responsibility is on your shoulders. Who is this for? What is the reader's background? What do I need to do for them to have a smooth, painless experience with my translation? What does this source text even mean? Is this a typo or intentional? Why does this part seem to say the opposite of what it said earlier? Why are you like this? Okay. Obviously, I found out that translation is really hard. The more I translated, the more flexible I became in my thinking. I no longer cared so much when consuming Japanese media that a translator or a team of translators handled something differently from how I would have preferred. I'd already seen in my own work that I could come up with many ways to translate a single line, and they were all acceptable. Some would be better than others, absolutely. But when you have a deadline, your goal is completion, not perfection. We all need work to eat, and professionals who don't deliver on time don't stay professionals for long in my experience. Someone out there is probably remarking right about now, completion? You have to make it good. Astute observation. I'm glad you're paying attention. You're 100% correct. While the definition of good will vary from person to person, professionals who submit on time every time but with poor quality also do not stay professionals for long. It's a balance between survival and artistry, and I believe this applies on more than just an individual level. Companies need to survive too, and they survive by ensuring that their product will sell. If they do not believe that enough people will give them money for their product, why would they spend a ton of money up front to make that product available to those people? Worst case scenario, it could lead to the death of the company, and that doesn't help anyone. While I have my own preferences about what I like to see in a game localization, I do not begrudge anyone who has to make a tough call about the direction of a localization to ensure that the company can sell their product and therefore survive. No sales expectations? No localization. Sometimes changes are necessary. If that means a perverted old man character is a little less offensive in English than he would be if written exactly how he was in the Japanese to make it more palatable for that audience, yeah, I can live with that. Cultural sensitivities is a can of worms all on its own. Like in all work, plenty can go wrong when translating. Here's a tasty sampling. I would almost never have a direct line of communication to the original writer. Even an indirect line of communication was rare. I rarely had enough supplementary information. Sometimes it was just a big hunk of text and me, and it was my job to make it work. When I didn't have reference information, I would sometimes make a call that I would later realize was the wrong call. That always stung. Sometimes I would realize that the format I went with wasn't the best choice. I know I did the best I could have, but no one wants their work to have even a single error in it. How many cooks can fit in the kitchen? And are they communicating with each other? On at least one occasion after finishing my translation, someone else reviewed it, made edits, and submitted it. This is actually a great system. But there was one issue. It was Japanese to English translation, and the reviewer was not a native English speaker. In this case, it meant that my correct translation had its meaning flipped, making it incorrect. By the time I saw it, it was already too late. Had the reviewer spoken with me or let me review their changes first, it could have been avoided, but there's not always time for that. Maybe I'm great at creative writing, but terrible at more technical writing. Maybe the opposite. Even as a player, anyone can see that games often have both types of text. If the story doesn't have a creative flair to it, it can fall flat. If the mechanics are explained in vague terms with unclear directions, players can get frustrated because they don't know what is expected of them. Both skill sets are necessary. Depending on what the goal is with a particular localization, I think almost everything is justifiable. Maybe they're trying to market to a particular audience. Maybe they're trying to imitate a particular famous writing style. What I personally look for more than anything else these days is a localization with character. Flat and technically accurate can be really boring. And make no mistake, this is the easy route with Japanese to English translation. It's a lot harder to produce, but I will gladly take liberal and full of life over technically accurate any day. At the end of the day, if I want to optimize for unhappiness, I know that one of the most effective ways to make myself miserable is to obsess over the details. I'm not perfect. Why should I expect anyone else to be? I try to focus on the big picture instead. If it's good overall, that's enough. If you've been keeping an eye on gaming news and such lately, this will come as no surprise, but the topic of game localization has been on my mind recently because of discourse I've seen online regarding Unicorn Overlord and Eiyuden Chronicle. I've seen some interesting videos on YouTube in response to the reaction Eiyuden Chronicle's localization has gotten. And if you want to see some more focused responses, check out the video description for links to 2 videos from channels I've really enjoyed. It's impossible to be right. It's too subjective. From one perspective, a translation could be amazing. Change the framing though, and suddenly it's hot garbage. No one will ever create a localization that is universally well received. There is only preference. I like this more than that. I don't even need a good reason to feel that way. I feel what I feel. Sure, it makes for a much more engaging conversation when I have solid reasons behind my opinion, but I like what I like. Translators aren't perfect. They're human just like I am, but I know they do the best they can under the circumstances, and for that I am thankful. Without them, I would never have gotten to experience many of my favorite games of all time. I wish they got more recognition for all their hard work, but it can often feel like an invisible role. If no one says anything about a translation, that's good news. If people are talking about it, it's usually bad news. It's okay not to like a game's translation. I feel that way sometimes too. It's especially hard when it's a translation for something you really care about. In those moments, I try to remind myself that it's not necessarily bad, just different. I always enjoy talking about game localizations and hearing people's thoughts and feelings, and I'd love to hear yours too. So please share them in the comments. I know this topic can bring out a lot of strong reactions, so I would ask everyone to practice tolerance. After all, with the right framing, we're all wrong. Remember to subscribe for more and to give the video a like to tell the world there's value here. Now go find some fun. Peace.